Most buyers only saw a rusted classic coupe rolling into the auction house on a flatbed. They saw flat tires and a dented frame along the rocker panel. To them, the long windshield crack, catching the harsh overhead lights, was just a streak of frozen ruin. They missed the fact that it once wore deep blue, only seeing how that paint had blistered away into ugly patches of rust and primer. They dismissed the original headlight chrome because it was completely milky with heavy corrosion. They believed the red sign taped to the cracked glass that labeled it scrap, starting the bid at $700. The auctioneer was a heavy Detroit man with a thick local accent. He leaned into his microphone, making it very clear that if no buyer claimed this old muscle car today, it would be dragged straight to the scrapyard before sunset. The shallow crowd laughed, while dealers simply checked their shiny watches. One flashy broker in a fancy wool coat stood up front, muttering that $700 was pure charity for this rusted junk. Another agreed, joking this barn find would make better cinder blocks than a ride. The blind crowd treated this ruined coupe like a total joke. A sad, pathetic ending. A useless relic that had completely worn out their very limited patience. But standing in the back was 29-year-old Nathan Caldwell, with broad, tired shoulders. He wore a faded work jacket that still smelled strongly of old motor oil. His 6-year-old daughter, Zoe, held his rough, calloused hand tightly, clutching a worn stuffed bear against her chest. Nathan completely ignored the printed auction sheet in his hand. He just stared into that open engine bay, his pulse hammering in his ears. Because right before the auctioneer slammed that rusted hood back down, you and I know he saw what the flashy dealers completely missed. Zoe quietly tugged his sleeve, whispering that their apartment rent was due this Friday. Nathan did not say a word. His sharp eyes were locked onto a faint cluster of letters near the engine block, buried beneath 30 long years of heavy rust and grime. He slowly raised his bidding paddle. The entire room turned. They started laughing. Those arrogant fools had no idea the man they mocked had just spotted a hidden treasure worth more than every vehicle on that lot. Nathan Caldwell was exactly the kind of man superficial people completely ignored. He stood just over 6 feet tall, built with the broad shoulders of someone who spent his whole life working under heavy chassis and auto benches. His dark hair stayed short, while his face carried the quiet calm of someone who realized, very early on, that complaining changes nothing. His rugged knuckles were permanently grease-stained, from decades of thick grease that no fancy soap could ever scrub away. He had no fame, no wealth, and 0 shiny university degrees to show off. But among the real mechanics on the gritty edge of Detroit, Nathan earned a quiet, solid respect. He could look at a beaten motor and read its true story like a master tracker reading snow, easily spotting the welds, the casting marks, the wrong bolts, the honest work, that is the vision you and I need. All the honest repairs buried deep out of sight. Nathan ran a tiny garage, welcoming the wrecks and rust buckets that shiny superficial shops rejected. These overlooked cars arrived on flatbeds, carrying messy paperwork that others wouldn't bother to untangle. His pay was slim, his clients' wallets were even slimmer. But Nathan always worked with slow patience. He never faked a repair just to pad his bills. He never rushed a fix that deserved real time. His father taught him that reputation isn't built on flash, but earned slowly, one completely honest invoice at a time. His personal life, however, was a much rougher ride. Zoe's mother packed up and abandoned them when the little girl was barely 2 years old, leaving Nathan playing both father and breadwinner in a brutal city that never discounted rent for heartache. Zoe was deeply observant, the way kids get when forced to read a struggling parent way too early. She felt her worn-out shoes pinching her toes, but she never begged for a new pair. She knew her dad lied when he claimed he wasn't hungry, especially when they had only one warm dinner plate left to share. She knew the landlord called twice, hearing her father drop his voice to that quiet, panicked tone adults use. That protective tone adults use to shield a child from harsh financial truths. Tucked away in the corner of their cramped living room sat an old wooden chest passed down from Nathan's father. Inside lay dusty notebooks filled with sketches and faded photos of test engines, alongside old newspaper clippings of secret racing programs that completely vanished from public memory. In the late 90s, Nathan's father turned wrenches for an obscure private racing crew, and though the public never knew his name, he built legendary muscle car engines that untrained eyes never got to see. One of the secrets he shared with Nathan most often involved a mythical prototype known as the Sterling 12R, a 12-cylinder beast the clueless media assumed was destroyed in a tragic warehouse fire before ever spinning a single tire in competition. Ordinary mechanics dismissed it as myth, but you and I know for Nathan it was inheritance. His father believed that truly valuable engines never needed a flashy logo to prove their worth. You judged their real value by how cleanly the welds were laid, by the quality of the cast metal, and where the hidden serial numbers hid. That quiet wisdom followed Nathan right into his adulthood. And on that freezing afternoon inside the crowded auction hall, it snapped back into sharp focus the moment the loudmouth auctioneer popped the hood of that seemingly worthless rusted coupe. To the untrained eyes in the room, it was pure scrap. The catalog labeled it severely wrecked, mechanically dead, lacking paperwork, and strictly offered as junk metal. Its left fender was brutally crumpled. A massive crack stretched across the entire rear window. The cabin reeked of mildew, with a dashboard split right down the middle seam. The fuel system seemed completely lifeless, matching the cold silence of the winter storm. Most superficial buyers would walk away without lifting a single wrench. But you and I know Nathan looked past the rust that others judged. Because when that hood went up and dry dust drifted into the harsh auction lights, the real treasure appeared. You and I know the crowd only sees worthless rust. Nathan saw absolute genius. He noticed an engine block completely foreign to this old coupe. The custom engine mounts weren't built by some backyard amateur. Those bracket welds were clean, precise, and almost surgical. This was the precision of an elite shop built to push rare prototypes to their absolute limit. He leaned in closer, studying every line of the intake. The raw metal was hand-poured. Grind marks on the rough exterior proved a human hand built it, but the inner airflow pathways were carved to the exact millimeter. This wasn't some cheap backyard muscle car project. It carried the quiet genius of a secret engineering facility. And then his eyes locked onto it. Hidden back near the firewall, buried under thick ancient grease, 3 faint engraved letters caught the light. S12, the exact code his late father hunted down, scribbled over and over in that worn leather journal at home. The Sterling 12R, the mythic engine everyone assumed was ash. The lost third prototype spoken of only in auction whispers. Supposedly destroyed in the massive 1998 warehouse fire. Nathan knew exactly what was at stake. If this was just scrap metal, his rent money was history. But if this was that ghost engine, one careless mistake would destroy a priceless piece of automotive history. Cheap solvents could instantly wash away those historic casting marks. A single shorted wire could fry everything through those dry seals. Worse, an ignorant buyer would let this masterpiece get scrapped. Let's face it, the real treasure was buried under 30 years of grime. And he had only minutes to decide. Betting his last dollar on a gut instinct, passed down from the father he lost 9 years ago. The caller asked for a $700 opening, and nobody budged. Some buyer mocked the price, shouting that $700 was a joke. The auctioneer warned the blind crowd that without a buyer, this piece of history was going straight to the junkyard crusher. Little Zoe hugged her dad's leg, quietly pleading that they didn't need another car. They just needed their rent money. Nathan stared at her. For one agonizing second, he pictured a grim future where he failed to provide for his family. Then he raised his bitter paddle. The auctioneer stopped dead. Heads turned, then the room erupted in mocking laughter. That arrogant sound the crowd makes when they mock someone who sees a golden opportunity they completely missed. A flashy guy in an expensive jacket turned, giving Nathan a heavily condescending look. He eyed the scuffed boots, grease-stained hands, and the scared little girl, then flashed a smug, superior smile. The man was Trevor Maddox. He operated a massive classic car lot out west. You and I know the type. He made millions on hype, completely blind to real value. We both know how easily the crowd is blinded. Trevor leaned on the rail, yelling that if Nathan wanted a toy, a cheap thrift store was much better. Another blind voice mocked that you should only buy that ugly scrap by the pound. Little Zoe's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She hid her face behind a worn-out stuffed bear. Nathan stayed quiet. When you see what others miss, you hold steady. Sensing cheap entertainment, Trevor bid $800 just to needle him. Nathan bid $850. Trevor pushed to $900. Nathan held steady. Trevor stared, then laughed. He loudly declared he would not waste a dime on garbage, dropping his paddle in mock surrender. The heavy gavel fell. That rusted muscle car was Nathan's for $900. His entire emergency fund taken from an envelope hidden behind their cheap cereal. By sunset, the shallow mockery had spread far beyond the scrapyard auction hall. At work, a mechanic scoffed, saying the boss's blind trust in Nathan was finally going to shatter. Even his busy boss pulled Nathan straight into the back office, warning him to keep his junk obsessions off the schedule. Harsh gossip quickly flooded their block. At the corner market, while young Zoe stood quietly by the shopping cart, an old man at the register laughed to the cashier about how the poor kid's father had thrown their rent money away on a pile of useless scrap. Zoe stayed quiet until they climbed back into the cab of Nathan's old pickup truck. She gripped her stuffed bear, watching the streetlights slowly blur by. Finally, she asked in a tiny voice if that blind critic was right about his mistake. Nathan caught her worried reflection in the rearview mirror. He desperately wanted to tell her that everything was fine, but he kept quiet. He could not prove the vehicle's hidden worth yet, and he refused to make empty promises. He simply told her he could not prove those doubters wrong today. But he promised he would not let her down. Stick with me. That night, Nathan towed his prize behind his apartment building, parking it inside the tiny detached garage he rented for weekend projects. The Detroit air bit hard, while a cheap yellow bulb threw long shadows across the concrete. Let us watch closely. He did not rush like those blind skeptics would have. He did not just dump fresh gasoline down the tank. He did not carelessly crank the motor or grab the rusted spark plugs. If this was the treasure he suspected, one careless move could ruin a priceless piece of history. He did not see worthless scrap. He treated this rusted shell like a sacred relic. Using a soft brush, he gently cleared away years of blind neglect from the iron. He aimed the harsh work light down so the rust cast shadows across the buried serial number. He photographed every weld, carefully measuring the exact bolt spacing on the covers. He checked casting measurements against hand-drawn diagrams inside his late father's notebook. He marked every hidden clue with a strip of masking tape, logging the true value in a private leather journal for his eyes only. Imagine this: on night 3, little Zoe wandered out in her pajamas, holding a beat-up stuffed bear under her arm. She paused. Her father knelt by a rusted hood most people would ignore. His eyes were exhausted, but his hands stayed completely steady. She quietly asked if he was fixing the old junker. Nathan shook his head. He had to uncover its secrets before turning a single wrench. Zoe stood there, quietly weighing the wisdom of his words. She walked over, resting her toy on the torn, worthless passenger seat, as if this forgotten machine was just lonely, waiting for someone to finally care. Those innocent words hung there, striking a deep chord in his chest. He stared at that simple bear resting on the ruined vinyl. Then he studied the dark, mysterious shape hiding deep under that hood. He realized right then, forget the price tag. This beaten-up car was already teaching his daughter a beautiful lesson about seeing real value. That treasures the blind crowd dismisses as worthless junk are simply waiting for someone patient enough to look closer. He dragged his father's heavy wooden chest out from the dark closet, carefully studying those fragile old pages line by line. Right there, hidden inside a fragile maintenance log, was a folded note in his father's precise handwriting. A Sterling 12 prototype, only 3 units were ever built. 2 were destroyed in a warehouse fire, the third, completely unconfirmed. His father believed one pristine engine was smuggled out the back door long before the fire caught, hidden by someone who saw its genius and refused to let a masterpiece burn. For 2 whole weeks, he chased that truth at night, barely sleeping. He hunted through every public archive he could possibly find, tracking Sterling Motors and their forgotten, short-lived racing legacy. He cross-referenced faded photos, scrutinizing every rare casting number. He even sent letters to retired mechanics listed on those ancient race day rosters. Slowly, the hidden picture began to take shape. Sterling Motors once had massive dreams of dominating the European endurance circuit. But a massive fire ended it all. The company claimed all 3 prototypes burned to ash. "Look closer with me," one buried local newspaper article quietly hinted that the post-fire inventory was incomplete, suggesting that priceless components were secretly moved right before the fire started. He pieced together a theory based on deliberate human choices, not coincidence. A discreet, independent shop hired directly by Sterling Motors itself was likely trusted to smuggle out their most valuable components. Right in the middle of that blazing inferno, one brilliant engineer made the bold choice to hide that priceless prototype inside a worthless-looking car, rather than letting corporate lawyers quietly destroy an engineering masterpiece. This ugly car traded hands for decades, rotting away in dark barns and forgotten backyards, until it finally landed on the auction block as an overlooked, rusted piece of junk. But the priceless engine hidden inside was never actually destroyed. It was just waiting for us. He gathered the evidence. Photos of the dusty engine block, old snapshots from his father's trunk, exact measurements of the intake, original blueprints of those custom engine mounts, a faded S12R serial number, a forgotten report from a warehouse fire, the simple handwritten note left by his father. He slipped these overlooked clues into a plain envelope, mailing them to Sterling Motor Heritage, the division protecting the history of Sterling Motors. Before they replied, a shallow hustler stepped inside. "You and I know the type." Trevor Maddox, the same snob who mocked him before, now stripped of his arrogant, superficial smirk. He spoke in a hushed, careful voice, a fake, friendly tone that let Nathan see right through the trap. Trevor claimed he had reconsidered, pretending to pity a struggling single dad's tough situation. He offered $5,000 cash that night, trying to buy what he thought was trash. $5,000 was a fortune to a dad drowning in unpaid rent. A life-changing amount. Little Zoe, coloring quietly by the workbench, looked up when she heard that amount of money. Nathan watched her calculate that money with the innocent hope of a 6-year-old. She imagined new shoes, a winter coat, and the heavy stress melting off her dad's face. But Trevor's sudden kindness was a cheap cover, and a wise man always looks beneath the surface. A man who dismissed a rare find as worthless one week doesn't turn into a savior the next without some greedy motive. Nathan said no. Trevor's fake smile vanished. His voice turned freezing cold. He warned Nathan to understand what he had, because if he missed its value, someone else wouldn't. Nathan slammed the door on the con artist and locked it shut. 3 days went by before the call finally came from Sterling Motor Heritage. The voice on the other end certainly didn't belong to some low-level office clerk. It was the personal office of Vivian Sterling herself, the 28-year-old executive running the Heritage Preservation Division at Sterling Motors. Vivian commanded any room she entered. Let's see if she'd judge a masterpiece by its rusty cover. She arrived at Nathan's modest garage on a dark, rainy afternoon, stepping out of a huge black sedan carrying the steely confidence of someone raised entirely in elite corporate boardrooms. She was flanked by lawyers, engineers, and collectors who bought cars worth more than mansions. Her chestnut brown hair was styled to flawless perfection. She wore an expensive tailored cream dress with a sharp collar, topped by a neat navy blazer. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete, a sound that made the dirty, cracked workshop feel incredibly small and cheap. Her dark, critical eyes quickly scanned the thick dust and the worn-out pegboard. She saw the bare light bulb and, finally, a struggling mechanic in a greasy jacket beside his rusty coupe. But through her eyes, every year brought endless letters from dreamers claiming they had discovered rare, lost prototypes. And almost every single one was just worthless junk, wildly exaggerated or clever fakes, judging only by the surface. She saw a broke mechanic, but you and I know she missed the real gold. She didn't bother hiding her arrogant, condescending attitude. She coldly explained that her office was constantly flooded with photos of old junk, sent by amateurs hoping they had struck historic gold. She sharply noted that almost all of those engines. The crowd saw junk, but wisdom knows how to spot hidden value. He didn't flinch. He expected people to only see the surface. A corporate director won't risk her shiny reputation on a stranger's rusty find. He calmly replied that he never expected her to blindly believe him. He just wanted her to truly look. He popped the hood, flicked on a light, and laid his hidden evidence on the bench. She scanned the pages quickly, ready to confirm her doubts and walk away. Then she froze, her eyes stopped right on the S12R photo. He quietly showed her what was really there. He pointed right to the spot where that hidden weld sat. He explained that this matched a secret reinforcement pattern used only for engines with enough massive torque to break standard chassis frames. He showed her the custom intake, a detail no ordinary builder would ever spend so many exhausting hours creating for a standard coupe. He pulled out a 1998 test bench photo showing a similar engine block sitting on a steel frame in a dark corner. She found herself staring at that faded photo for a long time. In the background, half hidden and turned away from the camera lens, there stood an older man wearing a pocket watch chain and a heavy buttoned-up work jacket. His face was totally blurred, but his stance. Let's look closer. That stance hit her hard because she grew up seeing it at family dinners. The blurry man in that lost photo might actually be her grandfather, the actual genius behind Project 12R. The mastermind whose priceless dream was dismissed by the company as a complete failure. She stood there in complete silence for a long moment. Her initial dismissive look didn't entirely vanish, but it definitely started to change. Replaced by deep caution. She no longer saw Nathan as just another crazy dreamer. This man held a priceless piece of her family's forgotten history. Breaking the silence, she quietly warned him that nothing could be official yet. She had to bring in a team of independent automotive experts. He just slowly nodded, expecting nothing less. She left in silence, her luxury car disappearing into the heavy rain. This long, quiet wait became a deeply painful struggle for Nathan. A second, final eviction notice arrived in the mail. "You and I know how the world treats dreamers." His boss cut his hours, claiming Nathan cared more about junk than his job. Money got tight, and the pantry emptied. His little girl stopped asking for new shoes. She taped her backpack strap together, bravely pretending it was always meant to look like that. Her quiet courage made his heart ache with guilt. In his darkest moments, he truly started questioning if he was chasing a worthless dream instead of providing for his little girl. Meanwhile, Trevor Maddox refused to give up. He somehow discovered that corporate reps had visited Nathan's small shop. That rich bidder finally saw that his loud, smug display had cost him a fortune. So he retaliated with paperwork. He filed a bitter complaint, claiming the Rusty Coupe's title was fake and Nathan was trying to inflate the price with lies. He even claimed the auction house accidentally sold a vehicle with a messy, disputed history. You and I know a loud lie doesn't need truth to do damage. It just had to be loud, so the county launched an official investigation. Overnight, this hidden masterpiece risked being locked away over a petty, superficial legal dispute. If the car left, Nathan couldn't protect the fragile secrets hidden beneath the grime. A careless inspector might scrub away the very rust protecting that priceless serial number. That first superficial inspection, it went completely wrong. Decades of deep rust made the factory serial number impossible to read clearly. One blind expert even claimed the special metal welds were simply the ugly scars of a cheap, long-forgotten crash repair. Another admitted the intake might be a rare, custom-built part, but argued that alone did not prove it was a prototype. Vivian's lawyers warned her that chasing this buried piece of history would look to outsiders like a foolish emotional mistake, because her own family was tied to that abandoned project. The 12R engine was always seen as a failure for Sterling. It drained massive budgets and gave back nothing but disappointment. After the fire, they buried the plans where superficial eyes would never find them. Vivian was fighting a quiet battle to vindicate her family. If that hidden motor was real, her grandfather's genius would be vindicated. His brilliant vision finally rescued from decades of corporate shame. But if the rust hit a mere replica, the critics would brand her a naive leader who let feelings override cold business logic. The quiet tension broke one night when little Zoe, standing by the kitchen sink, whispered a question to her father. "What happens if those fancy experts say you're completely wrong?" Nathan stayed quiet, staring down at the kitchen towel in his hands. He saw the truth then, with absolute and brutal clarity. You and I know this was no longer about proving doubters wrong. It was about keeping a quiet, sacred promise to his daughter. He had looked her in the eyes and promised to succeed. Yet the shallow world lined up its credentialed experts to call him a fraud. That final, crucial inspection took place inside Nathan's humble garage. The small workspace felt crowded with all those expensive, slick suits. 2 elite engineers, a historian from the company vault, and 1 sharp lawyer. Plus Trevor Maddox, the blind bidder, claiming to be the victim of a scam. Look closely with me. The small garage felt like a cold courtroom. One suited engineer suggested they simply pour a harsh, aggressive acid onto the block to burn off the protecting rust. Nathan stopped them before the chemical even touched the rag. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who knew. Most eyes see only rust to be scrubbed, but harsh chemicals would ruin the priceless history hidden beneath. The corporate engineer sneered, annoyed by patience he couldn't understand. He mocked Nathan, asking if he was just a buyer or some preservationist. Nathan calmly replied that he was the only man who looked past the grime to understand which specific spots could be saved and which could never be touched. After a tense silence, Vivian relented, letting him try his slow, careful method. She recognized the true reverence he had shown from the beginning. Nathan worked with absolute reverence, brushing a mild, protective solution over the iron. He positioned a bright lamp low, skimming light flat across the scarred metal. Next, he dusted the block with a specialty powder to highlight lost engravings. Finally, he brought a magnifying glass close to peer through the rust. A complete serial number emerged, S12R Proto 003T. Total silence. The historian slowly opened a heavy leather binder straight from the Sterling Motors vault. Inside lay 98 original files, detailing 3 of the legendary 12R prototypes. 2 of those files bore unmistakable stamps in bold red ink, lost in a warehouse fire. But the 3rd file had a faint handwritten margin note, unconfirmed destruction. The forgotten serial number in that book matched this pile of supposedly useless scrap. With a silent nod from the stunned panel, Nathan stepped forward. He removed the secondary cam cover with the steady hand of a surgeon. Let us look closer. Deep under the dried oil lay a tiny, easily missed signature. The historian leaned down and his entire face went pale. He turned the binder toward Vivian, pointing to an old list of automotive engineers. That secret mark belonged to the chief designer of the iconic 12R muscle car, the very creator who died believing that his greatest achievement was thrown away as a meaningless corporate mistake. He was her grandfather, Vivian gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. All the cold armor she wore on this gray afternoon shattered in an instant. This machine was never just some valuable asset. It proved the genius of a man they had mourned for decades. He was no fool chasing ghosts. He had actually built it, and a wise soul hid it away from those destructive flames. Trevor Maddox, who could only see superficial rust, stood entirely speechless. The man who mocked them loudest at the auction now had absolutely nothing to say. His arrogant mocking suddenly looked like nothing more than, "You see it, right?" A pathetic scramble to grab a masterpiece he was too blind to value. An appraiser spoke up, offering a preliminary estimate in a quiet, stunned voice. If this incredible discovery was verified, this was the sole surviving 12R prototype left on Earth, with a value well over $2 million, and a historical legacy money could never buy. Zoe, watching from the doorway, stepped inside and gently tugged on her father's sleeve. She spoke in the exact same quiet whisper she used back at the salvage yard, asking if their dusty, neglected machine was actually a priceless treasure after all. Nathan smiled warmly, dropping down to look her in the eyes. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her. He looked at her, gently explaining this forgotten treasure was never junk. It had simply been overlooked and left forgotten for decades. Fast forward 6 weeks. Sterling Motor Heritage held a massive unveiling at Detroit's legendary auto museum. The gallery packed in wealthy collectors, cynical journalists, and Sterling board members. The vintage coupe rested on a low stage under soft white lights. Its heavy metal hood stood wide open. The rare engine sat untouched, polished only where decades of dust demanded it. It proudly displayed its original serial numbers and the signature on the cover. The vintage body was stabilized, no cheap glossy paint to hide its truth. Every metal dent was smoothed out but kept completely visible. Even the heavy rust on the rocker panels was sealed, never scraped away. Sterling made a choice that defied every cheap marketing instinct. They chose to preserve the hard miles this machine actually survived. Vivian Sterling walked to the podium, sleek black dress and hair pulled tight. She stood tall and confident, but her voice was softer than at the garage. She didn't begin by bragging about the engine's massive price tag. She began by admitting her own company's massive failure. She spoke with absolute honesty. Sterling Motors almost let a priceless piece of automotive history get crushed into scrap, simply because its rusted outer shell didn't look pretty anymore. She freely admitted she had almost walked away. Right into that auto shop, totally ready to dismiss everything. She told the silent crowd that the man who spotted this masterpiece wasn't some wealthy expert or high-end classic car collector. He was just a single dad standing in worn boots. A working man who saw true value while everyone else looked away. The entire room turned. Nathan waited near the wall, wearing a pressed shirt and his best jacket. Little Zoe stood right beside him, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. He didn't offer a flashy smile, completely ignoring the skeptics who once laughed. His gaze stayed locked on his young daughter, who stared back up with a look far deeper than simple pride. It was pure unspoken understanding. You and I know she finally saw value exactly how her father taught her. A wealthy collector immediately offered a massive fortune for the rare muscle car. But Sterling Motors begged to keep it. Inside their permanent historical collection. Nathan could have easily walked out of there, a very wealthy man. But we know he never chased the quickest, easiest payout. Instead, he gave them 3 firm conditions. First, he demanded that the name of the original designer, Vivian's grandfather, be formally restored in the official record books, reclaiming his rightful place in the company's public archive for everyone to see. Second, he demanded that the classic coupe and its legendary engine must be preserved in their beautiful raw truth. Every rust scar had to remain visible, ensuring it would never become some fake, shiny showroom piece with its true soul erased. And third, you and I know Zoe had to be there when that engine roared to life. Let us head over to Sterling's private test track, where she would finally witness what true patience, and looking past the rust, can rescue from absolute oblivion. Vivian agreed without a second thought. She no longer saw him as a rich executive judging a grease monkey mechanic. Instead, she looked at him with the deep respect of a grateful heir. A respect for the man who pulled a priceless legacy from the scrap heap. Trevor Maddox stood far back in the shadows, away from the microphones, and he finally realized there was no longer any room in this story for guys like him. 6 months after that big reveal, on a crisp morning at the Sterling Motors test track, the classic coupe rolled forward under its own power for the first time in nearly 30 years. The restoration crew kept their promise to the letter. They left a few scratches on the door completely untouched. A crude weld bead near the front cradle remained, looking exactly like it did on that fateful scrapyard auction day. They did not spray the paint to some fake mirror-like gloss. It looked like an honest barn find that survived a rough life, finally making its way back home. Nathan arrived early alongside young Zoe, who wore a warm new coat while clutching her old stuffed bear. He placed a quiet, guiding hand on his daughter's shoulder. He stayed quiet. A man of vision does not need to boast. Vivian Sterling watched from nearby, no longer the doubter who had walked into his garage expecting a cheap scam. Instead, she was seeing a priceless piece of family history emerge from decades of darkness. In that quiet moment, she finally grasped the truth. If Nathan had listened to the fools laughing at that scrapyard, if he had chosen the easy, safe path that afternoon, this legendary engine would have been crushed into worthless scrap metal before the sun even set. The crew ran their final safety diagnostics. Fresh oil, clean fuel, strong pressure, and a perfectly rebuilt ignition system. Let's remember they asked Nathan to take the wheel because he alone saw a masterpiece while others saw a rusty shape under a tarp. The key turned. The massive engine did not roar right away. It cleared its throat, rough and low, like a giant waking up from a 30-year sleep. A tense silence fell over everyone standing by the track. Then the mechanical rhythm grew deeper. The 12 firing cylinders found their beat, and the 12R roared to life like rolling thunder, echoing across the pavement and into the open sky. The very buyers who mocked him at the auction stood frozen by the fence, completely silent. They were listening to a treasure they had written off as garbage, measuring value only by the pound. Zoe clamped her hands over her ears, beaming with pure joy. She yelled over the roar that her father had heard this car's heartbeat long before anyone else did. Nathan knelt down to fix his little girl's collar. Against the biting wind, he whispered that his ears were no sharper than anyone else's. He had simply chosen to study the details instead of laughing at the surface. And that right there is the real secret behind his success. This was never just about a classic car, it was always about people. About good, honest folks dismissed for their dusty boots, small wages, and grease-stained hands. About everything the blind crowd calls worthless the second it loses its luster. This is the line between those who glance and those who study. As the roaring engine settled into a smooth, steady idle, Vivian walked over to Nathan. Her thank you was not the transaction of a typical buyer. It was the deep gratitude of a granddaughter reclaiming her family legacy. She quietly shared what Sterling Motors was planning next. A new 12-hour scholarship for young mechanics who lacked the cash or the credentials for a big university. Raw builders who held overlooked natural talent in their hands. Nathan did not want flashy praise from the crowd. Still, he was glad this would open doors for other overlooked underdogs. As the morning sun climbed higher, that mocked piece of auction scrap sat proudly on the track, a quiet symbol of true value. Faded paint caught the sun as that rare engine finally breathed. The young girl who once saw only a pile of rust now stood beside him. She smiled, fully understanding at her young age how easily the crowd misses true value. You and I know how easily the crowd dismisses masterpieces when they judge too fast. And so many incredible minds get overlooked because they wait quietly until their undeniable value finally decides to speak for itself. For them.